In business today, three things to know. First, Fed and furious. The markets speed ahead on the release of the Fed minutes that show a more dovish central bank. Then, a virus called Heartbleed, and it's here to wreck your digital life. We'll talk about the massive security breach from the supercomputer bug and which companies are profiting from trying to wipe it out. And into Africa, a major investment by Marriott Hotels will put in hundreds of new hotels across the board. The Rise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz, and I am back from Nigeria, where we went to cover the recalculating of the country's gross domestic product. When I arrived, it was around $260 billion a year. Just 8 hours later, the government announced the GDP was now $510 billion. All thanks to Nigeria's new math, which factored in movies, music, and telecom, making it Africa's largest economy and the world's 26th largest. The announcement was no doubt timed to coincide with the annual conference of the International Monetary Fund in Washington, where we will broadcast from tomorrow. Now, to the U.S. Federal Reserve and the minutes that the Fed released Wednesday that rallied the markets. The minutes show the Fed was unanimous in its decision to drop the 6.5% unemployment target before raising interest rates. That said to traders that the Fed is, in fact, no hurry to raise rates, and that they certainly liked. So let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closing at 16,435. That is up nearly 180 points. The S&P 500 closing at 1872, up 20. And the NASDAQ at 4183, up 70.91. Taking a look at some of our top stocks we're watching today. Bank of America reaches a $772 million credit card settlement with U.S. regulators over claims of improper and deceptive credit card practices. Bank of America closing up 18 cents to 16.62. Hewlett-Packard will pay $108 million to settle a Justice Department and Securities and Exchange Commission investigation into potential violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. That act involves bribing foreign officials. Hewlett-Packard closing up 27 cents. And Yum Brands opened its first Pizza Hut in Iraq in an effort to expand the world's largest pizza chain in emerging markets. The restaurant is located in the Majid Mall in Erbil. In the Kurdistan region, Yum Brands closing up 87 cents to 76.81. And commodities, gold closing up, oil closing up as well, 90 cents to 103.46. So now let's read between the lines of what the Fed minutes really mean. Doug Handler, chief U.S. economist at IHS Global Insight, joins us from Boston. Doug, welcome to Rise Exchange.
Glad to be here.
All right, so anything in these Fed minutes that we were not expecting?
No, actually, the minutes were pretty much in line with expectations. It was a great report for economists and for financial players, though. Showed labor force growth is kind of weak, but improving. Just the right conditions, really, for the Fed to keep monetary policy loose for a while.
And that certainly rallied the markets. But this report, though, kind of also suggested that there was a little bit of a communications problem with the Fed, because when they first talked about the 6.5% interest rate and possibly raising, not 6.5% unemployment rate, excuse me, and possibly raising interest rates, the market interpreted that mean that rates may go up sometime in the next 6 months.
Yeah, there was a communications problem. There actually was a video conference earlier in March because the Fed knew that this was going to be a problem. But the reality is that the Fed just cannot have explicit rules to determine monetary policy. The economy doesn't work that way. And for the Fed to start the transition process from this rules-based approach to more of an ad hoc analysis, was bound to disturb markets. The Fed knew about it, and the Fed tried to mitigate some of the damage here as well.
Well, in some simplest terms, it's kind of going from an objective standard, if you will, to more of a subjective standard, because when you talk about the unemployment rate, you can't really look at that number anymore, 6.5% or any percentage number, right? Because there's so many different factors that get baked into it, namely how many people are actually in the jobs market.
Yeah, that's right. When the 6.5% threshold was put into place, nobody in their right mind really thought the labor force would grow as weakly as it had here. So the unemployment rate is going down, but for the wrong reasons. And really, kudos to the Fed here for recognizing it, for being flexible about it, and actually moving on from that sort of policy.
So when it looks at employment then, can you give us a totality of what we should look for then in trying to evaluate what the Fed might do?
A couple things. The Fed said the labor market was not the greatest shape, but improving. So that kind of tenor needs to continue to keep interest rates on an even keel here as well. But what I think the Fed really is going to be looking at will be wage growth, and be looking at that as a precursor of inflation. And average hourly earnings are flat as a pancake here now. So in terms of predicting inflation, health of the labor markets, that would be the metric.
Yeah, and without any sort of wage pressure, we're not likely to get inflation. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so where does the tapering then stand for the Fed? Anything in these minutes, anything that they've said recently that might suggest a different approach to their tapering? You know, there are some economists who say they simply cannot go below $40 billion a month.
No, I think the markets are too volatile really to determine whether 10 billion here or there are going to matter. I think given their statements about the economic growth prospects, we're going to be continuing the taper as planned and be finished with the process by the end of the year.
All right, Doug, and finally, I just want to move on and talk briefly about home mortgages. They fell last week as refinancing slowed. Something to be concerned about, do you think?
Yes, it is. One of the basic tenets in our forecast is a rebound in housing activity, and it's a little late in occurring, and we still believe it is going to occur. But when we get data like this that shows really that the financing activity hasn't picked up yet, we are concerned. I think it'll get better later in the year, but that's another area we look at carefully these days.
Okay, Doug Handler, Chief U.S. Economist at IHS Global Insight from Boston. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up, the fight against a computer super bug and the damage it may have already reaped. You're watching Arise Exchange. Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
It's called the Heartbleed Bug, an undiscovered cyber bug that security experts say can cause major havoc by allowing hackers to gain access to highly sensitive information, including your credit card numbers, usernames, and passwords. Security expert Tamara Combs and Can We Studio CEO joins us from Charlotte to explain how it works and what we can do to protect ourselves. Tamara, welcome back to Arise Exchange. Why is this so scary for people?
This Heartbleed bug is impacting almost everyone on the web. About 66% of websites use the technology that the Heartbleed bug was able to take advantage of.
And what does it do?
Well, it sounds pretty simple, but it's very sophisticated. We're in using OpenSSL. Computers are able to
Can you explain? I want to slow you down for a second. Can you explain what SSL is?
Yeah, it's a security protocol that allows information to be transmitted across the web encrypted. And so with OpenSSL, sometimes they will test to make sure there's a computer on the other end, and the computer that's on the other end will send back data basically verifying that the computer is in fact there. That data, that packet of data, is called a heartbeat.
And hence the name Heartbleed.
Yes. What the Heartbleed bug did was mask itself and sent something that looked like encrypted data in order to get the computer on the other end to send back information that had, like you said, credit card information, username, password.
So, for example, the way it might work is if you buy something online, you put your credit card number in there, and you think it's secured because you get that little logo on the other side from major retailers that say it's a secured site. It may not, in fact, be secure.
That is the irony of this whole thing. We have been used to looking for that magic lock icon and HTTPS. And in fact, that's what I've taught my parents and grandparents to look for before putting in their credit card information. And it is those very sites that are using OpenSSL that were indeed attacked.
Okay, so do we have any idea who's behind this and why would they do this?
The OpenSSL bug, I believe, was done not maliciously, but I believe it was just a developer error. They left something out, and they left a hole and opened us up for an attack. There's no one named.
But that's not the bug, right? That's sort of the portal in. Someone had to develop a bug way in, or are there many different ways of getting in because of this glitch, if you will?
This was a bug of omission,
I see.
Meaning there was an opening left in the software that allowed for this to happen.
Okay, so if no one entity is behind it, then how do you think it's being exploited, and is there any evidence that it in fact has been exploited?
What's happening is sites like yahoo.com, google.com, sites that we are all used to using, Internet Explorer websites that have secure information passed along on them, have left us open and vulnerable for this. And so if you, there are websites that you can go to and you can type in your URL or a host website, and it will tell you whether or not that website has been left vulnerable. This fix was actually made last week, but the developers were given a week to actually put fixes in place before announcing it to the public.
Okay, so what should we as computer users, and we all are, do then? How do we protect ourselves?
Right, that's a great question. You need to start by changing your passwords. That's number one, because these packets of information have been sending information for the Heartbleed Bug, and they probably have your username, your password, sometimes credit card information, but if you change your password, they won't be able to get into the sites that you were used to logging into.
And you recommend everyone change their passwords to all of their sites today?
If you have highly sensitive data, I would strongly recommend that you change your passwords and make sure it's not something simple like ABC123 or a
password.
name.
Or your name.
Or password, yes, that's another popular one.
Okay. Tamara Combs, thank you so much for walking
Thank
us
you.
through this. It is a complicated issue. Appreciate it. Time now for our business ticker stories making headlines around the world. Comcast made its case to government regulators on Tuesday over its $45 billion takeover of Time Warner. The company is arguing the merger will benefit consumers and will not limit competition. Today, Executive David Cohen testified before the Senate about the impact the merger will have on consumers. Critics say the new super company will give Comcast too much leverage in the market. Here's what they had to say.
While this transaction will make us bigger, that's a good thing, not a problem.
This proposed transaction consolidates too much power in the combined video and high-speed internet market, giving Comcast a virtual gatekeeper role for fast internet-delivered video and innovative new services.
If the deal is approved, the new company will be the country's dominant TV and internet provider, covering about 1 in 3 American homes. Toyota launching a global recall of 6.8 million cars for a variety of technical issues. And that means Toyota is the new leader in car recalls. Yesterday's recall brings the total to 8 million Toyota vehicles recalled this year, taking the top spot from General Motors, currently facing congressional interrogations on its safety practices. Toyota and GM are just two of the growing numbers of car companies issuing recalls this year, with more than 17 million recalls globally since January. That's more than half the record number of recalls in 2004. Less than a week before tax day on April 15th, if you are trying to call the IRS for help, there is something you should know. You may not get to talk to a representative. Experts say because about 18 million of the Americans who try to call the IRS during tax season won't actually get to talk to someone. People who were successful getting through waited for more than 25 minutes. It looks like Captain America finished what Harry Potter could not. After the comic book sequel broke box office records this past weekend, Marvel, which owns Captain America, beat the Harry Potter series as the most successful franchise in Hollywood history. The 3D action flick starring Ryan Evans raked in more than $96 million here in the U.S. Over the last decade, Marvel has created a series of notable comic successes, such as Iron Man and The Incredible Hulk. Well, as mentioned at the top of the show, the annual meeting of the International Monetary Fund kicks off in Washington, D.C. On the agenda, the impact that trouble in the emerging markets may mean for the markets here. Brian Jacobson is Chief Portfolio Strategist with Wells Fargo Funds Management. Brian, welcome back to Arise Exchange. Last time you were here, you picked up a big award.
Yes, it was really fun to be in your studios last time. So yes, that was for the Rising Star in the mutual fund industry. It's a real honor to receive that, and it was an even bigger honor to be there in person with you.
Well, I don't think about that, but thank you for coming back now that you're a rising star and you're still wanting to stay with us. We appreciate that. So, Brian, let's talk about what the IMF is going to do over the next couple of days. How much of a focus is the emerging markets going to be down in Washington?
I think quite a bit. You know, the International Monetary Fund, just historically, really what they were about was trying to help countries with what they called balance of payments problems, as far as trying to intervene in their foreign exchange markets. But ever since the 1970s and 1980s, their role has really transformed to one to encourage more development and financial integration. And you cannot deal with financial integration unless you're going to deal with the emerging markets. That's the fastest growing area. It's an area that really needs to have better financial systems in place.
And there is some concern about the growing risk the emerging markets may have, sort of as a contagion on the rest of the world, would you say? Because they've had trouble now for a couple of years. But the question is, how much has Europe and the U.S. felt it? Do you think it's going to get worse here?
Yeah, you know, that is one of the big hot topics right now is how bad could things get if there are continued problems in some of the emerging market countries, especially those that have what are called unfavorable balance of payment deficits, where they're effectively exporting a lot less than what they import. And so then they become dependent upon funding from like the United States or Europe. And some of those investors might not necessarily be taking on risks that they're aware of. And so if they suddenly have problems with payment systems, big swings in commodity prices, let's say, that can create some problems like we saw in the 1998 experience with the Asian financial crisis. And that's really what they want to try to avoid. And honestly, I don't think that any problems that we're going to be seeing are going to come even close to that.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So there's also political unrest, and Ukraine is an example there. Are we starting to see any sort of developments in the rest of the emerging markets as to what's going on in the Ukraine, or is that kind of like, from an economic standpoint at least, sort of abated?
It has abated, and I think one of the reasons for it is because it appears as though, based on what we know now, that a lot of the problems are going to be relatively contained to that particular area. There's always the question of, you alluded to it before as far as on the financial side, contagion. Well, you can also get that on the political side, some contagion if it creates unrest there. What's next? Is Russia going to, do they have extraterritorial ambitions in other places? But it looks like it's very contained. However, that could make it for choppy going for some of those emerging European countries. Like if you look at Hungary or if you look at Slovakia or Estonia, those are areas that could continue to struggle a little bit here just because of some fallout associated with that problem.
Yeah, and while you were talking, we were showing video of what looked like a fist fight in the legislatures of one of the emerging markets, and investors don't want to see the lawmakers fighting literally among themselves. I want to ask you briefly about Nigeria. I was in Abuja this weekend, where they rebased their gross domestic product. So now, magically, Nigeria is Africa's largest economy, the 26th largest in the world. Does the GDP number really mean anything in Africa right now when you have per capita, income at $2,000 a person?
You know, you're absolutely right. It doesn't really matter that much when you have per capita income that low. It's kind of like the reason why a lot of people make a big deal about how big China is, how it surpassed Japan as far as the size of its economy. But when you do it on a per person basis, they're still in poverty. And I think that's really the biggest issue from sort of a development perspective. It's not necessarily the size of the total economy. It's how wealthy are the individuals in those societies. So I thought that it was a really interesting story as far as how it is that Nigeria suddenly magically found effectively like 2/3 more of their economy, but that doesn't really move the needle for putting food on the table for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. You can't eat the GDP.
Correct.
Brian Jacobson from Wells Fargo Funds Management. Appreciate it as always.
Thank you.
Ahead, how Medicare is making one Florida doctor super rich. Our favorite person of the day, next on Arise Exchange.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
The great thing about Arise Entertainment 360 is that we cover the 360 of entertainment, food, fashion, lifestyle, culture. We're able to cover it all. And the thing I love most about the show is we're able to do a stunning combination of high and low. So we can talk about Rihanna on the red carpet, but we can also speak about high art with people like Sanford Biggers and Hank Willis. We actually spend quality time with our guests and we really get to know them. It's really intriguing because we get a 360 look at our guests.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a Florida ophthalmologist who has managed to earn nearly $21 million from the U.S. government program Medicare, even though his office was raided last year by federal authorities probing Medicare fraud. The federal government released a list of doctors this week who earn the most money from Medicare and for which procedures they are charging for. Dr. Solomon Melgen came out on top, charging the Medicare system for 37,075 injections of a macular degeneration drug to 645 patients. The government paid him an average $320 for each procedure. If you do the math, that means each patient received about 58 injections. While Melgen has never been charged, Florida is considered the top state for Medicare fraud because, well, the state has a lot of old people. A quarter of the top Medicare doctors practice in Florida. Last year, Melgen also came under scrutiny for his relationship with New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez after the lawmaker used Melgen's personal jet for trips to the Caribbean. Now, Melgen isn't the only eye doctor to rake it in from Medicare. According to the Associated Press, 151 ophthalmologists accounted for $685 million in Medicare charges. Melgen's attorney says he has done nothing wrong, and the American Medical Association opposed the release of the government data, saying it's out of context and leads to wrong conclusions. And so, eye Dr. Solomon Melgen, for seeing clearly how much he can make from the government and off old people, is our favorite person of the day. Next, Africa has become a hotbed for investors. Find out which hotel chain is getting into the mix and boosting its brand in several African countries. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Arise serves underserved communities by bringing them news, information, sports, and entertainment from places that are becoming part of the world economy, that are becoming a part of the world voice, and decisions that are affecting things in the world that people care about. They care about the economy. They care about safety and security. And if you come to Arise and you watch our broadcast, these are the things we're going to bring to you every day, 24 hours a day.
One of the great things about Arise Entertainment 360 is we have this Arise to Your Health segment, which really focuses on the holistic approach of being healthy. So we do everything from working out to juicing to getting in shape by doing fun exercises like bouncing on a trampoline or wearing these bouncy boots on our feet when we're jumping all over the set. We've done karate, we've danced the weight off, we've done just about everything. And of course, I love when we eat on set, but we do it in a very healthy and clean way.
Marriott is now the largest hotel company in Africa, nearly doubling its presence there with its recent acquisition of Protea Hospitality Group. The move gives the company a total of 160 hotels in the region, allowing it to key into untapped potential for travel and tourism in Africa. To talk more about the significance of this deal is Stephen Hayes. He is the president of the Corporate Council of Africa, which represents nearly 200 companies with private investments in the continent. Stephen, welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thank you.
So what do we read into this deal with Marriott? Why all of a sudden the big purchase?
Well, it's a huge move on behalf of Marriott. I think they recognize that the market in Africa is almost unlimited in terms of the future, in terms of tourism, in terms of business. And the fact is that they bought probably the most successful hotel chain in Africa, and it also effectively challenges a lot of competitors as well. It's going to be very difficult for other hotel chains worldwide to match that.
Does Marriott have a lot of work here to do in improving the hotel chain, or was this a high-end brand? And I say this because I've been to several hotels in the area, and you know they're old, honestly.
Yes, they have. I've stayed in many of the proteas around Africa as well, and you know they're basically a good 2 to 3 star hotel. There's going to have to be a lot of work in upgrading, but I think that Marriott's strategy is a very smart strategy. I think they're going to have to do a lot of what I call capacity building as well. Not simply the infrastructure needs to be strengthened considerably, but also they're going to have to train staff and make it far more uniform to compete worldwide.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering if their business of the typical person who stays at the Marriott or these hotels right now are business travelers, and that's obviously a big piece of the pie in Africa, or is the tourism market getting stronger?
I think it's the tourism market. The business travelers are really focused in on the high-end hotels that are already there. The business travelers also go to certain key capitals, be it Nairobi, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Abuja, where there's also very high-end hotels, and nearly all the high-end business travelers stay there. The Protea appeals more to the tourist. And I think that Marriott's challenge will be to upgrade that to also bring in the business travelers as well.
And has tourism been largely increasing through Africa? We know that business travel is certainly up in Africa because of the opportunities, but I'm wondering if the countries are as well starting to gain a stronger foothold in tourism.
Well, I think the tourism market is just unlimited, but it's uneven also. Kenya tourism has dropped because of the violence, the perception of violence. South Africa tourism has gone up. It varies according to what's going on around in the country. But by and large, in the long term, the tourism potential is just strictly unlimited, not simply in the countries that you would associate with tourism now, the Tanzanias, the Kenyas, the South Africas, but there's thousands and thousands of miles of untapped beaches as well.
What is the hotel model in Africa right now? Marriott is buying this company. Is it a franchise model, or will American brands actually manage the properties in Africa?
There are sort of what I call 2 models of investment that the U.S. companies such as Marriott and others are taking. One is the Walmart model, where you buy an already existing brand and chain and then build on that. And the other is what I would call the Procter & Gamble model, where you take in and you start investment from the beginning, where you build a plant in Nigeria or you build a plant in Kenya and then start the production in that way. I think there's going to be varied models. I think the significance of the Marriott buying the Protea is that there weren't that many chains to buy. And therefore other hotels are going to have to start from the base and build.
Well, that's actually really interesting. So part of this deal, you think, from Marriott was seeing the tourism opportunity and sort of blocking others from an easy entry, because other companies that may want to get in there are going to have to really start digging through the ground.
Yes, I think so. I think it was a very smart business play.
And what other companies do you think are eyeing this from the United States? Do we see Hilton in there?
Oh, I think you'll see Hilton. I think you'll see Hyatt. I think you'll see where Radisson has already started. Particularly, it's got a brand new hotel. It's the second best in Addis. It's in Kenya. So you'll see all the major hotel chains go in now. It's going to be piecemeal as opposed to the Marriott approach of buying large-scale blocks of hotels.
And we have about 30 seconds, but does Marriott, by buying a large-scale block through many African countries, sort of protect itself from the downside of any one country? For example, violence, you mentioned?
No, absolutely, absolutely, because Protea is in so many different countries. So they've protected themselves in many ways, and then they've also gotten out their extraordinary marketing. They've gotten their name out very quickly, which will stay out there ahead of others.
Okay, Stephen Hayes, President for the Corporate Council in Africa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And tomorrow on Arise Exchange, we will be traveling to Washington, D.C. and go to the International Monetary Fund's annual conference. We will bring you the show live from there and have reports here on Arise, both in London and New York throughout the day. Taking a look at the markets and how they finished the day, the Fed certainly helped them along. Up triple digits for the Dow, green arrows for the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. I'm Andrew Schmertz. See you tomorrow here on Arise Exchange.